victim to India. With India in its political season, how will its domestic politics affect the potential for conflict? What role is rising populism playing in the standoff? The BRICS summit will start in about a month, but right now the question remains about how the standoff could impact the summit, and will Prime Minister Modi come to Xiamen?
Well, 7 weeks into the China-Indian border crisis, an increasingly caustic rhetoric means that the potential for escalation remains high. China has vowed to take all necessary measures to protect its legitimate and lawful rights and interests with regard to the movement of Indian troops. Although the standoff between Indian and Chinese armies at Doklam still shows no signs of letting up, both sides continue to look for a way to end the impasse without resorting to violence. To talk about the confrontation and cooperation between China and India today, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Professor M.D. Nalapat from Manipal University and Mr. Rong Ying, Vice President of the China Institute of International Studies. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Zhou Yue. So, a remote corner of the Himalayas has become a topic of contention over the past 1 month because of the Indian troops' incursion into what Chinese considered its own territory and no signs of withdrawing. What exactly caused this to happen in the first place? I want your take on this, both of you. Mr. Rong, you first.
I think the fact is very clear, as my government's position paper says that 2 days ago. It happened in June, and when the Chinese border troops, the Chinese side, would like to construct a road meant to improve the transportation, and also in the area, Chinese as regarded as indisputable part of its land, and by at the side of the border between China and India, the section we call second section, which is delimited. It's this part of this border, this part of boundary, is different from the other parts of the other section of the boundary, which is not delimited. So for China, it was in a very serious sort of incident. It's an incident of totally different nature from the previous incursions happened in other sectors of the boundary, which were not, delimited.
Because unlike conflicts before, standoff before, this time the border limits is actually clear. Both sides agreed on the border between China and Bhutan.
That is the real problem. That is, from Chinese perspective, the India border troops crossed a section of boundary between China and India that is delimited and recognized by the two governments. So for Chinese, it's a very serious incident that has been, its territory has been sort of undermined or invaded, if I can say. So this is a big issue.
But why did the Indian authorities decide to do this thing at such a cost and cause such a controversy? What do you think, Mr. Nalapat?
Well, I'd like to say that the India-China border is unfortunately has not been properly delimited for a very long time. In fact,
but not that section.
Well, I'm saying that the entire border has not been delimited for a very long time.
Yeah.
And as far as I understand, that particular area is actually, according to the Bhutanese, and according to us also, we also believe that it's Bhutanese. So in that situation, I think it would have been good if China, India and Bhutan were to sit together, and then the Chinese could present the proof and all the evidence that is actually Chinese. And that, I think, would be the best way to follow.
But according to the Chinese, what is outrageous, it is a dispute between China and Bhutan. Why the Indian troops get to the territory of Bhutan to solve a contentious dispute, if it is, between China and Bhutan?
Well, I'd simply like to say that, India has had a very long historical, cultural relationship with Bhutan. Bhutan is our very friendly neighbor. And in that situation, we have been helping the Bhutanese in various ways, including economic development and including their security. So it's only natural that as a very good friend, India would also get involved in this kind of situation.
If I may, I think the incident now with Professor Malabat's sort of take, we are talking about two contentious issues. One, the boundary, this part of this section,
whether it's
delimited
or not.
Delimited or not. The second thing is whether India has a right to intervene if it is an dispute.
To help
to
what he
help
calls a friend,
country, Bhutan,
for security
a
concern.
sovereign, independent state. So this is the crux. I think if the two sides can sort, or if between us today, if we can sort out these two issues, I guess the incident or the crisis can be.
But obviously, you two have different understandings about the justifications.
Exactly. That section, the second section, is delimited, demilitated.
According to the 1819 agreement between China and British government.
That's true.
Back then, India was still a colony of British.
Well,
that's of course the Chinese understanding of this.
Well, you know, I think the Chinese very rightly have been quite negative about the British role in the subcontinent and the British role in China. And I think, you know, quite frankly, the British role has been in many respects very negative. So the fact is that according to our understanding, in 2012, there was a clear understanding that this particular area of dispute will be discussed between India, China and Bhutan. And as far as we are concerned, that 2012 agreement still stands.
Is there a 2012 agreement on that? Tri-junction agreement?
There are a lot of talk and I think reports from the Indian press about that 2012 understanding. Let me make it very clear, to the best of my knowledge, this is a kind of unofficial sort of understanding between the two SR, special representatives between China and India. But that understanding just meant for the record of the previous talks that had been going on for many years. Number one. Number two, there's also an understanding that agreement or whatever you call should not make public, should not be made public, because it is just meant to keep the record.
So it's very vague agreement.
And the third, the most important thing is that even though the boundary of that sector may not have been put on the, there's no signpost and other, but the agreement was there. When it where it started and which the alignment of the goal, which direction it goes, this is for sure. So I think the other international law, in terms of legality, India government and the Chinese government should have the right and should inherit that understanding. Even though the understanding of the SR goes, there will be discussion.
Let's talk about
that is not going to affect the legality.
Let's talk about the cause
agreement.
of this dispute, the road construction on the Chinese territory. India maintained it has changed the status quo and posed a security threat to India. But the Chinese don't understand what kind of security threat is that.
Well, I'd like to say that we don't understand exactly why that road is so important to Chinese security.
But Chinese have been building roads all over the country,
No, that's
everywhere.
precise, no, but the point, but I don't think the Chinese have been talking in terms of using quote-unquote all possible means. Now, in international parlance, all possible means is a very emotive phrase, and these are three words that are very seldom used. Now, from our point of view, that road is very close to what we call the Chicken's Neck, which is a very narrow strip of territory linking the rest of India to eastern India. So we are always very conscious about any kind of a change in the ground situation in the surrounding area of the Chicken's Neck. So it is in that context that we have requested our Chinese friends
how would you want to
avoid
respond to
completing that road.
To Mr.
I do
Nalabat's
have
point?
to respond. Let me make it very clear. I think the purpose of building that road is very clear and open to to the public and particularly to the Indian side, because well before the start of the construction of the road, the Chinese side, according to the practice of border management, notified twice.
Bhutan.
Yeah, no, to notify the Indian side that, look, we are going to build that road. And then when the Chinese side started to build that road, June the 16th, and 2 days later, and so within the notification, when the first notification and start of the road, it was around more than 1 month. The Indian side did nothing. But when Chinese side started to build the road, June the 16th, and then 2 days later, 18th, the Indian border troops came with a big number with weapons and bulldozers. So we really do not know why India did that. If India had any reservations, if India have any question, they should use that mechanism, border management, and tell the Chinese side.
According to Mr. Rong, India has the pre-knowledge of this road construction, but why do you want to use this as an excuse to incur into Chinese territory?
Well,
at least that is something China controls.
As I said quite clearly, for us, we are not sure if it is Bhutanese territory or whose territory it is, quite very frankly. But I simply want to say that India and China have a lot to gain from each other. Today, for example, there's a good trade of around $71 billion, of which is $50 billion in China's favor. My estimate, which is that about $300 billion of trade is possible between India and China. If you go to India today, you'll find Chinese mobile systems are all over. Chinese networks are now, frankly, very strong in our electronics.
We'll come back to the economic area of this part of the discussion later on. But I still want to talk about the dispute part. If there's dispute between China and Bhutan about the border, why can't China and Bhutan sit down and have a negotiation? What is India's stance on this?
Yeah, because from the Chinese perspective, this Donglang area is not a disputed area. And the Bhutanese side, that between China and Bhutan, there were also border talks. And we already, I think, have 24 rounds. Yeah, 21 since 1980s. And there's a kind of a general consensus and understanding where the disputes are and how the management, which side they are under control. So from Chinese perspective, and I think from the Bhutanese perspective, it's not a big deal.
But can Bhutan independently get into talks with China to solve this?
That's a very good question. And I think if Bhutan has its own problem, if it had reservations, it should have raised. But it's nothing. It has nothing to do with India.
And China
and
always
India should not take
that India has been pulling the strings of Bhutan so that Bhutan cannot on itself solve this problem with China.
I'd like to say that I think is a very unfair statement to make about our Bhutanese friends. They're an extremely proud people, an ancient people with a long culture.
But they are a sovereign country.
Of course. And the point is that we have a lot of cultural links with them, and we have a lot of security links with them. And as far as I understand, these links are with the full consent of the Bhutanese government. So I think our two governments have been working together for a very long time, as indeed we have been working, for example, in Bangladesh. We recently signed an agreement in which Bangladesh and India can send trucks and people through each other's territory. So India has very friendly relations with a lot of countries, and Bhutan is one of them.
I think that Professor Murabhat made a very good point. I think Bhutanese are very proud of people, and they are independent sovereign state. And if you look at the statement about the incident, regarding the incident issued by the Bhutanese side, and this is literally a kind of a refute of the statement by the Indian government regarding the account of this issue.
So
because the Indian side, they were
Bhutanese,
in consultation.
The Bhutanese and Indians may not be on the exact same page on how to solve it.
That is at least my understanding. And if you look at the very fact that India has a especially close relationship with Bhutan does not give them any reason or right legally and
Okay.
I think politically to intervene an issue between China and Bhutan. So I think our Indian colleagues have really got an answer to this question. And the more this crisis goes on, the more, unfortunately, the our Bhutanese
All right.
friends draw on, the more the situation would become complicated.
Where this
is a-
crisis will lead up to and how to solve this, will it jeopardize the bigger picture of China-Indian cooperation? We'll be talking about this on Dialogue later on this broadcast. So, Mr. Nalapat, the Chinese Foreign Ministry, Defense Ministry have been very firm about this. China will not tolerate Indians' incursion any longer. In your opinion, what's the end game will be look like?
Well, I'd like to say that I do hope that as two countries that have been friendly for thousands of years, that we can conduct this issue in a way in which there is no any kind of a thinking of resort to the military option. Now, for example, there are locations in the Kashmir, for example, which belong to us, but which, in fact, the Chinese are there, and the Chinese and Pakistanis are there. But we don't talk the language of war. We don't talk the language of battle. We would like to have the language of discussion and conciliation. So on this issue also, we hope that the language of
did you
force
get the
will
point?
not be used.
But did you get the point that the Chinese will not stand idle if the Indian troops remain where it is now with this equipment and personnel?
I'd like to say that that is the decision to be taken by the Chinese side. From the Indian side, it is very, very clear that the Indian side regard this particular road as being a problem for its security. I personally don't believe that this road is at all important to security of China. So even if this road construction is postponed by several years,
So-
I don't see any harm to China.
Mr. Dong, do you think it is possible Indian troops withdraw from that part and China stop construction of the road? Is that something we are bargaining for?
I think China has made it very clear the preconditions and the basis for meaningful dialogue or talks of this issue is the Indian side should and unilaterally, without condition, to draw the troops back to its side. I think Professor Malabat talks about security concerns, and I'm very glad that this is made it public. This is an issue, an excuse for the intervention of it, which is from the Chinese side. Well, personally, I think, and I hope the viewers are also aware, it will be very dangerous because a security concern of a particular country should never
At the cost of the
at the
others.
cost of the others, and it should never be an excuse for a kind of intervention or crossing delimited borders. This is very dangerous. If other countries, use the same excuse to intervene in an issue like that, it will cause total chaos and huge problem. And we had enough problems in the region and the world. And I don't think it's in the interest of India and in the region and the world to misuse this issue. Everybody had a security concern, but that does not mean it should be the excuse. The excuse or pretext for intervening.
The Chinese always consider the theme of the world is peace and development. Both China and India are fast developing economies. Should the two countries let this topic, let this issue stand in the way of their economic development, at which cost?
Well, I would say that certain other countries will be very happy if this escalates into a conflict, because it will also affect, apart from the fact that, very frankly, those countries will get much more leverage over India and over China if the two of us are fighting, is also the fact about the Indian market, which is a very big market. And frankly, Chinese companies are today very high quality, whether it's telecom, whether it's energy systems, whether it's infrastructure building. It's not 10 years ago. Today, your companies are high quality and low cost. And therefore, there's a very good chance that the Indian market will have more and more Chinese participation. this will not be to the liking of other countries whose companies are active in our market. So there will be a lot of rejoicing by countries other than India and China if this unfortunately goes out of control.
Does also China think that China-Indian cooperation economically, politically are important, that we shouldn't be taken hostage by this issue?
Exactly. That's why we thought that the Indian side should immediately correct this mistake by withdrawing its border troops, so that these issues can be solved in a peaceful and prompt manner. And I agree. I think the confrontation between China and India, and both of us will be losers, and cooperation. And both of us, we were going to gain. That is why we said that we would like, we have exercised such a kind of long-term and constraints and forbearance, actually, and for waiting for the Indian side to make a correct decision and to correct this mistake, and so that these issues, this incident could be resolved quickly and peacefully for the benefit. For the
and in
benefit
September,
of
China
the two sides.
will play host to the BRIC Nation Summit in Xiamen, a coastal city in China. Could this incident upset the agenda of the BRIC Summit, and will Prime Minister Narendra Modi come to China?
Well, you know, I don't know what my Prime Minister will do, because he will take a decision based on his own view and the view of his government. But I only would like to say that, I mean, I'm very much hopeful that he will come to China, and hopefully there will be a discussion between him and the Chinese leadership, and hopefully we can find an amicable situation such that both sides remain firm in their commitment to each other.
What is the political climate now within India? I believe that Prime Minister Modi is also under a lot of pressures not to back down, not to appear soft to the Chinese. What is the political climate right now?
Well, it's not a question of appearing soft to anybody, but the reality is, frankly, it's a question of helping an old friend, in this case Bhutan. And of course, you know, Professor Rong has been talking about the Bhutanese having a different view. Well, I haven't heard any statement or read any statement by them that indicates that they have any different view from the view that we have got.
But you are helping a friend by infringing on the core interests of another big power country.
I would only like to say that, as I said, we are not convinced that of exactly whose land that is, or that we are really infringing upon that particular interest. And I would like to point out, throughout the India-China border, several thousand such incidents have taken place over the past, and it's therefore very important that both of us as big countries, we firmly align the border in a mutually agreeable manner.
And yes, please.
Yeah, I think you're right, because along the boundary areas, I mean, there are incidents, I mean, many years, but this time, as I said at the very beginning, and also my government made it very clear, this is different. This is different from all the previous incursions, previous incident that has, I mean, happened between the two sides on the delimited border. But this time it's delimited. This is a totally different. It's in a different nature. And the Bhutanese question is also different, because I think for whatever reason that does not give any Indian side, I mean, either out of the special relationship, or because of the security concern, to intervene an issue between two independent sovereign states, because that does not help the issue, does not help India, does not help the peace and stability of the region.
And finally, I want to talk about the trust between two major powers in Asia. It seems there is still a lack of trust between China and India about the strategic intent towards one another. That's why the border issue hasn't been solved for so many years. What does it take to improve the mutual trust between two major neighbors, China and India?
I think the border issues has been there for so many years, and thank goodness, if we look at the past decades, And particularly, I think since 2003, the two governments realized and I mean reached an agreement that it should be an seeking commonly, jointly a political approach. That's why we had a special representative mechanism. That's why we had a kind of framework, political parameters and guidelines for solving issues. That's why we all work together to honor and implement the Greenland part. But that is why we are able to achieve peace and tranquility on the border, on the boundary region, on the borders. But this time is different. The Indian side, as we have been talking about this, they send boundary troops crossing the border.
Because they consider
this is change the rules, change the rule of this game, causing big problem. That's the problem we're having.
So we have different readings of strategies of both.
Well, I'd just like to point out that, I mean, in my view, this is a minor incident in a faraway location, quite frankly, and it would be a terrible shame if the future number 1 of the globe and the future number 3 of the globe come into a conflict which will only benefit other countries because of what, in my view,
and
is
it will
a
do
minor
harm
incident.
to both.
Terrible harm to both. So my own complete belief is that you have a very wise leadership in China. We have a very good leadership in India. And these two wise leaders, my hope is that they will meet, take the long view, take the broad view, and not a narrow view, and we will be able to resolve this issue in such a way that we can create more trust. And let me again point out, I'm glad CGTN is giving a chance to an Indian scholar for this, because the fact is, we hardly know each other. China and India don't know each other. The contact is so limited. And that is very difficult, because the reason is the Chinese are friendly to India, Indians are friendly to China. The more we know each other, the better we will understand and trust each other.
All right. And on that very hopeful note, we end this charged debate on this very contentious issue. Thank you very much, Mr. Rong, and thank you, Mr. Nalapad. You've been watching Dialogue here on CGTN. I'm Joe in Beijing. Goodbye.